Hey, this is James Pratt here with Ride Oklahoma. I'm here with Matt Fleming, a friend of mine, a fellow adventure rider, and we're here to talk about GPS technology. I mean, Matt, you're probably like me. You get questions all the time about for years, people how to do GPS, how do you do routes, because you're kind of known around these parts as the GPS guru for mapping and everything. And so, what we want to do is put together a video series that kind of explains all this so that Matt doesn't have to say the same thing over and over and over to every single person. So we're trying to make it a little easier, kind of put it together. So Matt, kind of cover your background a bit.
Uh, I'm just an IT nerd. I like to ride motorcycles and part of having to work all the time is having to plan your next trip, right? So I spend a lot of time working around, playing around with maps.
Yeah. And so my background, I've been a pilot for a long time, and I started GPS a long time ago, before they had maps, and so quite a bit of background there. Then we've had Garmin's in my airplanes, and I've used Garmin's on motorcycles. I've been doing it for a long time. Probably not quite as technically adept as Matt is, as you are, but I've used it quite a bit longer. That's for sure.
Yeah,
Long
yeah.
time. so so anyway, what we're going to talk about this time. We're going to break this up into multiple videos to make it easier for people to understand and follow. And we're going to get into some demos of actually showing how to planning routes and how to use different software pieces. But this first session, we're really going to talk about in general about from a big picture view is how does GPS work? And we're going to talk about a few basic navigations and some of the types of GPSs, kind of give you everybody a level set so they get started with one place and everybody's on the same page. And then we're going to go into some more detailed in later sessions. So, Matt, let's talk about the kind of a talk about the basics of GPS and kind of how it works. It's been around for what, I don't know, 30 years. I don't know if it's been that long, but it's been
It's
a
it,
while.
it's been a while, yeah.
You know,
Uh, Really, there's three parts to the GPS system. You've got the satellites that are orbiting the Earth. You've got ground stations, which are basically just big dishes that are stationary that monitor where those satellites are, and then you've got the receivers, and that's your GPS device. That's your cell phone. That's yeah, exactly.
yeah,
So yeah, that's it, and that's in. It's a receiver, so your GPS device isn't actually talking out, it's actually just receiving the data from those satellites. So there's about 30 navigation satellites orbiting the Earth. They all have, there's an expectation of where they are in space. So um, based on those ground stations and the satellites, we have a very accurate depiction of where those are.
well, they're so accurate that telecommunications uses them for timing on their networks. When
Yep.
people use them for time, they're extremely accurate. I mean,
Yep.
down to the thousandth of a second or less. I mean,
Yeah.
they're yeah.
Yeah.
So
Extremely accurate. Yeah. Um,
and so using
so
that time, yeah, those
yep.
time from old set, how long that signal takes to get there.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah, so yeah, it takes your receiver hears that signal, and then when it connects to usually 4 to 5 satellites is when it really grabs that accurate data, and then it calculates the distance from the satellite and determines exactly where you are to
yeah,
the dot.
yeah. So that's kind of how they work. I think a lot of people think, oh, you talk back to the satellites, and with the Garmin InReach, a few things you do, but not typically. GPS is not. It's a one-way transmission. It just comes down, we
Right.
listen to it, and that's it. So,
Right.
um,
Yeah. You touched on that a little bit. The communicators are a little bit different. They also use a different satellite network.
correct.
So, yeah, they're using satellites, but not the same GPS satellites.
Yeah, and then just a little further clarification. There's also two different satellite constellations, aren't there? I mean, we have the
Yeah.
United States has ours.
Yeah. Actually, there's four.
Oh, four. Okay.
I believe I
Okay.
don't keep up with the others, but yeah, we've got GPS. We've got GLONASS, which is like the Russian,
Gotcha.
um, and then you've got Beidou, which is Chinese satellites,
Okay.
and I want to say there's one more. I can't remember the name of it, but yeah,
And then the U.S. system. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
U.S. system. Yep.
Yeah. And so like my Garmin picks up two systems.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it'll get signals off two different systems.
A lot of when you're shopping for a GPS device, you kind of want to if they have that data available, it's really nice to have because you're not relying on just one satellite system. You can connect to two, three satellite systems at
Yeah.
once.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about so we talked about how they kind of how it works. And let's get into some basic navigation terms about how these things. Because when I first started, we didn't really have maps, and we didn't have routes. We had waypoints. We had a few waypoints around, but they were
Right.
scattered, few and far between.
Yep.
And we'd navigate with our airplanes to these waypoints, and that's about it. But nowadays, we got a lot more than that, and it's really kind of like Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs. Really, it's all comes down. It's like a breadcrumb trail, but the route. I think a lot of people get confused between waypoints, routes, and tracks, and how they kind of go all together. And they're kind of the same thing, but not really. So you might touch
Right.
on that a little bit.
Yeah. So the navigation when you're talking about the tracks and and stuff, a lot of people will confuse routes and tracks. Technically, what a route is, let me back up. Uh,
Okay.
the typical format we use is GPX. So that GPX is really just a text file that has data in it. And depending on how that data is tagged is determines what that thing is. So a GPX can contain a route, a track, or a waypoint. You can stuff some other things in there too, if for proprietary applications and stuff. But generally, you've got those three things that you're going to deal with: is routes, tracks, and waypoints. Now, a track is, like you said, a breadcrumb. It goes from typically you would record that, right? It's a series of individual waypoints.
Right.
They're
Because
it's
all of it's really kind of made up of waypoints.
yeah, yep.
Now they're all just a little,
They're all just a little speck. Yeah,
little
yeah. They're
little breadcrumb.
a
And
GPS
so,
coordinate.
yeah,
Yep,
GPS coordinate, exactly. That's what they
yep.
are. So the routes, tracks, and waypoints are really kind of the same thing,
Kinda.
but kind of, but not really. Yeah.
Right.
But
So you got
tr-
your
tr-
waypoint is that GPS coordinate. That's that
yeah,
that X and Y. So latitude, longitude, that's what you're dealing with. So then if you string a bunch of those together, you form a track, when it goes in
yeah.
order from dot to dot to dot to dot. That's a track.
And
Uh,
typically tracks are like every 5 seconds or every 3 seconds or 10 seconds or
Yeah,
it,
and if you
we don't
start
have a lot of
using
them.
yeah, if you start messing around with software, you can actually get down to every second.
Oh, really?
So yeah,
Okay.
it can get really granular when you get into
Okay.
we just got better CPUs now.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So but yeah, so the track is a series of waypoints. A route is a series of waypoints as well. However, it's select waypoints. It is I want to make sure that I go to this intersection. I want to make sure I go to this spot, and then it doesn't care what the track is in between that spot and the next spot. The next spot could be 50 miles away. And what it does is because it's tagged as a route, it allows your GPS to decide how to get there.
Yeah.
Much like you open up Google Maps or Apple Maps and you say, take me to Starbucks. And it takes you from point A to point B. It gets you there kind of the quickest or however you have the settings configured. And so if you think about that, you're essentially a route is a series of these little A's and B's and C's, and then it's letting the GPS application or the GPS device, which the software is running on, decide how it gets to that next point.
Uh,
So
I, I've got a funny analogy on that. It's I kind of find the humorous. Is one time I was in Texas and we had a bike breakdown. We needed to find a way to get to a waypoint, an auto parts store. So we go into this cafe. Every these little towns have these cafes. All these farmers are sitting around. That's like going to a waypoint and going, "Hey, how do I get to the next?" You're asking your GPS, "How do I get to the next waypoint?" Which is
yeah,
the auto parts store. And I got daggone 9 different answers to go how to go a mile and a half down the street because
yeah,
everybody go, "No, you need to go to the tree and hang right." No, no, the faster way is to go this way. And so that's the
Exactly.
different routing is,
Yep.
some farmer telling you, no, you're going the wrong way, go this way.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So, yes, you might touch on that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I thought that was kind of funny.
Oh,
So,
no, that's perfect. It's a perfect way to describe it because it does get confusing because when you look at it, you say, well, I'm using a GPS, so I don't the route track whatever it is. I just want to go from here to here, right? But generally, when we're talking about adventure riding, we're following tracks. We want to make sure we go down those gnarly roads, the backwoods as much as
right,
possible. We're not trying to get from point A to point B as fast as possible.
correct.
We want to explore.
Because
So
whenever I set my GPS up, I can bicycle and I fly and do other things. So you can set when you use a route, you can say, well, I'm gonna go to point A to point B, which is 87 miles away. But if I'm bicycling, I might go one way. If I'm walking, I'd take a different route. If I'm flying, I'd go a different route. If I'm taking the subway, I'd take a different
right,
calculation. So those are all the different routing methods that the GPS can decide,
right,
right? And so
yep,
that's why in Google Maps, I think you have where you can say subway or
yep, or
walking or
walking,
whatever.
yep,
Yeah, and so
yep,
it's doing a different route for each type. And
yeah.
us is, but they don't have a adventure rider. I want the twistiest roads route
No,
routing
they don't.
algorithm.
No, they don't. You can get into some applications that do.
Oh yeah,
That's for certain. Yeah, there's actually a lot of applications out there that you can get into that kind of do exactly what you want to do.
yeah,
Hey, find me the curviest route between here and there,
oh yeah,
and it's pretty cool the technology that's coming around.
yeah. So that's news. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that, so that's cool. But yeah, so I think that's the reason we do ride. When I share people, I usually try to share tracks because that way it goes exactly where I want you to go. Where I
Yeah,
plan, yeah, it's very
yeah,
precise. The problem with tracks is it's a lot of waypoint. I mean, it's a whole bunch of
it is.
waypoints. It takes a lot of more storage to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, it does. It does, but lucky for us, storage is cheap these days.
True,
So,
true.
so for the most part, if you're sticking around, if you're sticking with this last decade of devices, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah,
You can thousands of tracks on a Garmin.
yeah. So we're going to talk about devices in the next episode in a little more detail. And so, yeah, we're going to talk about how to create routes, tracks. We're going to talk about how to create a route. I do this often, create a route in like Google Maps and then convert that myself to a track that goes to where I want it to go. And so, we'll talk a little bit about that and, yeah, some other things. So Matt, what are some common questions you get? I mean, you get these questions all the time, I'm sure, on GPS and
Yeah, yeah. So, I would say the one of the most common one, there's a misconception that you need cell service for your phone to function as a GPS.
good point.
And that's probably the biggest misconception we have out there is that there's your cell phone actually has a dedicated GPS chip inside. It is a receiver looking to receive that GPS data. It does not require a cell phone or cell data in any way. So there's that piece. So if you're just getting into it and you kind of want to explore a little bit and you want to play around with some GPS, you don't have to go buy a brand new device right away. You can start playing around with the applications on the phone, learn the terminology, learn the pieces. Um, and and so yeah, I'd say that's the biggest one I see. But
I thought
there's also.
well, listen, let me touch on that just a bit though, because I think people get confused because the what you need the cell phone service is to download the online maps. If you're out navigating and you have a GPS signal, it'll know where you're at, but you may not have a map for it. And that's where, but you can download that map. You might kind of touch on that just a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. So um, when you look at Google Maps or Apple Maps, all that data is online. So it's a constant feed from the internet. But when we're out in the middle of nowhere, we want to make sure we have that map data. So use applications that can download the maps for you. And that's another, I think that's another technical point we need to touch on is you've got something called the map data. That's the underlying, I mean, that's actually the data of the map. That's how the map is represented to you. And then you've got your, then you've got your waypoints on top of that. So when people talk about downloading maps, there's a confusion there sometimes. We're not downloading, when you download a GPX file, you're not downloading a map. You're just downloading the tracks and the waypoints, right? And then what you really want is that underlayer, that map. So there's lots of applications you can play with. If you think about your Garmin device, you have to load those maps on before you go out anyway, right? When you buy it, it comes with the maps on it. But if you want to update
some base maps,
yeah. And if you want to update it, you want different types of maps, map data. You have to load that up before you go out in the wilderness. So,
a good point. Now, the other thing we were going to touch on is I want to make sure we talked about is that GPS signal that we receive from 4 or 5 satellites. There are some limitations on receiving that, especially when tree cover or deep canyons. You might talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, so because it does have to reach out and to get the most accurate signal, to reach out to 4 to 5 or more satellites.
They're not all straight overhead.
They're not all straight above you. They're spread around the world. So anything that's going to interfere with that spread of that array. So you think a busy downtown, a big downtown areas like New York City, there's GPS is going to be slightly affected there. And lots of tree coverage. If you're in the dense jungle, you've got trees overhead, that's going to interfere with things. And then, when you get in the canyons and the mountains, you can limit your exposure to the sky, and you definitely need a good, decent exposure to the sky in order to get that accurate satellite.
Yeah, the good thing is the modern GPSs, they pick up that signal real fast. So once you pop out into the open, they'll find where they're at pretty darn quick.
Yeah. And when you look at things like cell phones, if you do happen to have service in that area, it will try to use that cell phone tower to triangulate and lock that signal on a little quicker. So that leads to some of that confusion that people have always had about needing the cell service as well, because it's actually written in some of the documentation for Android and iOS for if you need, turn on a GPS, which is assisted GPS, and that's just using the cell towers that you're triangulating to try to get that pinpoint accuracy, and just a little bit faster to lock on the targets.
Yeah. Okay. So, any other questions you commonly get?
Really, it's all about the devices themselves. So, what GPS device do I get? And I'm a proponent of using a device you already own, or one maybe designed specifically for a certain task. I've used the Garmin's. I'm not a huge fan of Garmin's. If you know me, I'm not a fan of Garmin.
Yeah.
But I've used them and I understand them. I just think that the software is a little lacking.
Well, I'm a big Garmin fan, but I would most definitely agree the software is very lacking compared to some other. Garmin has not stayed up to date. I mean, devices, I love them. They're rugged, bulletproof, but they charge a lot for the maps, and I don't like that. And they also their software is really kind of odd,
right?
To put it nicely.
Yeah, and that's kind of another thing, right? So when you talk about Garmin, you talk about map data. So do you need a subscription to anything? Well, that depends. Some devices you don't need a subscription for anything to stay current on your map data. Some applications that you may want to use to program or create routes or tracks, sometimes they'll require a subscription fee, but for the most part, there's lots of free applications to get started. If you find an old Garmin device, try it out. If it can accept a GPX track, then you're already steps ahead of where you need to be.
Yeah. Now, I think it's an important point to separate the software you use to create your routes and tracks and maps, all that stuff is not necessarily the same software that's on this, because you can use a lot of different software to create these routes and tracks
Yeah, there's
and send them to your Garmin or whatever GPS TomTom whatever you might
Yep.
have.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. There's tons of software. I've got a massive list of software that I use to create different routes, and it just depends on what it is, what kind of route am I trying to create? What kind of a track am I trying to create? Uh, you know, some of it includes really good Google satellite imagery. Some of it is very basic, and you just point and click and draw a line on a map, and you're done in a few minutes. But yeah, it's there's a lot of different software out there, and you don't have to use the same software to create your routes and your tracks for whatever GPS device you have.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. Any other common questions you get?
How to mount your device and how to power the
Yeah,
device.
that's a good one.
So there's a lot of times if you're doing some stuff on Thumper, right? You got a single cylinder. It vibrates a lot. You may not want to be using a USB plug
Yeah.
to charge your phone, and you may not want to use your day-to-day cell phone for that purpose. You may just want to throw an old cell phone on the handlebars, and that's where there's a standard for a lot of different mounts, but mostly GPS mounts. It's called amps, and it is almost every dedicated GPS device you find will have support for amps. Uh, but you just need to find an amps mount, and whether that's part of a RAM mount system or some other device that you see online, as long as it has an amps mount and you can mount your device to it, your Garmin or your old cell phone, then use that. There's several devices that I recommend, but and then as far as the USB problem on those especially on those thumpers, uh, magnetic charging plugs tend to work pretty well. So you get basically it's got a small little adapter that goes into the phone, and then the cord itself is magnetic. So the vibrations, it doesn't vibrate the USB port or
Mm,
your lightning port
okay.
and trash the port. Instead, it vibrates that magnet and keeps that setting,
Huh.
you know.
I didn't know that was available. That's cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
it's
Let's
it's
look into
pretty good
those.
stuff.
Okay. My nickname, my buddies, old longtime riding buddies, they call me James Crash Pratt because I've done a lot of crashing in my lifetime on motorcycles, especially on dirt bikes, and that's one of the reasons I'm a Garmin fanboy, because I have crashed my brains out so many times. These Garmins, they just I never had one fail. I've lost them, but I never have broken one. They're pretty damn durable,
Yeah.
and I have lost and broken a few phones. So,
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. There's some good mounts for some phones out there.
yeah.
I look at like the Hondo Garage Perfect Squeeze is a really good device. That guy knows how to make some really really good hardware to hold your phone.
Now we're going to cover some of that later because you've got a lot more experience in that than I have. So we're going to cover that a little bit later, these mounts and the things like that. So,
Yeah.
well, great. That's kind of what we have for our first session. And our next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to talk into Matt. We're kind of where we're going to dig into our next episode.
Yeah, I think we're going to dig into the routes and tracks and waypoints and kind of making sure, you know, what's what they actually mean, how to use them, how to create them, and how to follow them.
Yeah, and then later I think we're getting a little more detail about how to use some various applications to create those with. So yeah, that's our next episode. I think a lot of people are going to like that one because that's a good. That's why I get a lot of questions about creating routes and tracks and things
Yeah.
like that. So
Yep.
great. So stay tuned. Hope everybody enjoys this, and thanks Matt for your time. I appreciate it.
Hey, thanks, James.